Hello, this is the RPG Crawler and welcome back to another product review. This time I'm taking a look at some more Elfking supplements for Elfking, the Immortal Roleplaying Game. I will be covering two in this particular video, and then I'm going to produce another video focusing on their solo saga content where I'll cover 3 offerings. Right now I will be focusing on the adventure module, the Sleeping Tower, the saga of Ulthrain and the Skeglings, as well as the Day of 1,000 Nights, a Fey Tournament sourcebook. Both are sorts of adventures. However, the tournament sourcebook actually compiles several smaller mini-adventures into a broader, almost campaign sort of offering. Both of these offerings are available through a Drive-Thru-RPG in both PDF and print-on-demand format. The Sleeping Tower is a relatively smaller format book, clocking it in just 34 pages or so, with a mix of full-color cover and 2-column black and white and color illustrations on the interior. The format is very similar to other Elfking products that I've covered in the past, save for the size, with very clear headings on each section in line and full-page illustrations where necessary, and a relatively straightforward flow. The Day of 1,000 Nights has a format similar to other prior Elfking offerings, being a larger page physical format, clocking in around 46 pages. It also has a full-color cover with a mix of full-color illustrations, both in-line and in full-page spreads, along with the standard 2-column text format. It should be noted that, as always, the illustrations provided are a mix of machine-generated imagery with post-processing and manual corrections and editing to make them more coherent and for a more consistent design. As always, I will go ahead and give a brief summary of each adventure in turn and then cover what I think of the adventures together at the end. And since I will touch on the Sleeping Tower first, then a Day of 1,000 Nights, and then wrap up with a conclusion of both at the end of the video. With that, let's take a look at the Sleeping Tower. The Sleeping Tower, the saga of Ulthrain and the Skeglings, is an introductory adventure dealing with a ruined tower wherein you are attempting to retrieve an antidote to cure a Thane. It is meant for people who are new to Elfking. The contents are divided into 7 sections. There is an introduction, outside the Sleeping Tower, inside the Sleeping Tower, the Frenzied Skegling, the Sleeping Serpent, Ulthrain of Crow's Watch, and finally a collection of quick reference tables. In more detail, prior to the introduction is actually a preface that goes into the basic premise of the adventure. It includes information on the adventure being relatively straightforward and suited for characters of beginning ability to give a brief overview of the adventure being a sort of fetch quest into a defunct sanctum. It gives some guidelines on how the ending can lead to a choice for the party. The actual introduction starts with a sort of in-character story detailing the lore behind Ulthrain, the Thane of Crow's Watch, how he wanted to become more glorious than he was, some of the mistakes he made in building up his power base, how he was betrayed by one of his followers, and how he has brought one of the Pell Witches into question for her part in the whole scheme of the betrayal, where he learns of a poison that he was subjected to. This leads to the PCs, who are assumed to be part of his circle, being sent out to retrieve an antidote that the witch spoke of. The Sleeping Tower itself is then detailed. It is described as a ruined tower about a day's travel from wherever the circle is originally set up at. The wilderness is only vaguely described, allowing the GM to place things as necessary, although it is just assumed that the characters can get there safely otherwise. A rival circle is described in case the players want to either rival with them or eventually join up with them. This is called the Circle of Verigart. Their motives are listed here, as well as stats for their general companions and elite companions. Arrival at the ruined tower starts the adventure proper. It physically describes the outside of the tower in its obvious weathered condition. It gives some details on the structural weakness within the tower, just in case people try to kind of get destructive inside. And it gives general stats for damage and other challenge ratings regarding that. The tower grounds describes the immediate grounds outside of the tower, and there's information on the small goblinoid creatures that hunt in the area. They are given stats, at least for a couple versions of them, on the next page here. There is information on other encounter areas, such as the copse of trees, as well as the main entrance before it deals with the proper entrance to the tower. The interior of the tower is laid out in sections, just as you would expect of any keyed adventure, including a basic living quarters for more Skeglings, as well as the Frenzied Skegling that counts as a sort of mini-boss in the area. The Ruined Sanctum details the actual sanctum section of the tower and a serpent who has taken up residence within, an intelligent one that seems to be interesting and a dangerous encounter. The Everheart details a sort of item that functions as the serpent's heart and gives information on what happens if the characters remove it, at which point it becomes a sort of magic item. There's a sort of balcony exit that allows one to exit the tower proper, which concludes the adventure with the return of the original circle. Following this, there are stats for Ulthrain of Crow's Watch, as well as his background, and a little concluding paragraph gives hints on what the party can expect from what they've accomplished. After the adventure content, there are a few pages of maps basically detailing the outside and the inside of the tower, as well as some quick reference tables that are duplicated from the core rulebook to allow for ease of play. This includes some summaries of combat rules, as well as basic skills. Onward towards the Day of 1,000 Nights. The Day of 1,000 Nights touts itself as a tournament supplement sourcebook, which revolves around a summer day tournament festival. It has jousting skills within it, diplomatic negotiations, various battles, some journeys, and so forth. In the past, I have covered adventures, and I have covered rule supplements, and this looks like it kind of splits the difference, with some adventures scattered around, with some rule supplements all organized around the theme of the tournament. It is divided into 14 sections by the table of contents. There is a preface, a map of Eos, an introduction, a section on high circles, the invite, the tournament joust, the wizard's quest, the hunting quest, the worm's heart, the ruby gem, diplomacy at court, for personal glory, the circle champions, and the closing. In more detail, the preface goes into the basic premise of the entire collection, being a different format from prior offerings with a mix of adventures, some small events, some rule supplements. Then there's mention of the fluid nature of time upon Eos, on how the distortion of time factors into the event described in this book. There is, of course, the usual map of Eos, which, as always, is a vague map of the archipelago that functions as the world of Elfking. The introduction starts with the premise that the PCs have already been through a few adventures and have sufficiently raised their status to be noted and invited to a prestigious event such as this. It takes place in the Dream Realm, which is detailed thereafter, as well as the background on. It gives a background on the Summer Fae Tournament of Amira, which is the event in question. The high circles are vaguely introduced here, detailing 6 of the highest status circles within the realm of Eos. There's some general background given to them, however, a note is made that only the information necessary for this adventure will be presented here in order to preserve things for the future. The high circles themselves are described in this section, and each is given a brief introduction as well as stats for the most prominent members. These are not detailed stat blocks, but simply enough to get you the information you need for skill checks and basic combat out of the way. The invite section sets up the rest of the adventures themselves. It starts with how the PCs are invited to the event, as well as giving a brief description of the journey one takes to the tournament. There is a description of where to begin with the sections, as some of them can be played interchangeably, followed by a list of the events in total during the tournament. There's also some basic information on the accolades offered to the victors of the tournament, just to give them a reason to participate beyond just glare. The first of the events detailed is the tournament joust. It begins with a description of the joust itself, as well as how it takes a somewhat more brutal affair than in prior years. There's a description of the list where it takes place, as well as stats for a horse, which, as of course, necessary for a joust. The jousting lance is then detailed with its own weapon with special rules, as well as a greatsword. Although this is mostly as a backup weapon, the procedures for a joust then follow, as well as special combat rules for jousting in general, because you want to treat that a little bit different than a general melee. I expect that these can be used in slightly more lethal combat scenarios for mounted combat. The league table is then detailed, which tells of progress through the joust itself, including the 4 leagues, each called a standing, how to progress through them in sets of jousting matches, as well as any sort of special rules pertaining to this event in particular. The Wizard's Quest is detailed next, being a sort of Wizard's Duel style event. It is seen as less important than the joust, however, it is still well worth taking part in. There's a procedure which details how each challenger takes on a one-on-one duel of magic against an NPC or against another PC. Each duel starts with a certain amount of glare points to be used, and then stats are given for each of the current adversaries that one can do in the event. The actual procedure for the magical duel follows, which is somewhat more simple than the jousting rules prior. The hunting quest next gives a sort of person versus environment event. Each participating character is equipped with a set of armor with a certain lack of weaponry and shields, and are basically reliant on using their skills to take down various beasts. The Hunt Day procedure is detailed, allowing characters to attempt to find creatures within the Forever Dreamwood, and then an additional counter table is given, along with stats to detail the various animals that can be come across. There's also additional encounters such as a unicorn, a healing nest, a scattering of various lost mortals that you can come across to make the event more interesting. The Worm is another quest, this time dealing with PCs who have been heavily equipped and are facing a much greater foe. This time they descend into the lair of a worm, which is detailed out for a rather challenging boss-style fight, basically. Then there's the Rose Gem, which is separate from the tournament, although it is related to it. It's an event where a river is running through the nearby Dreamwood, and there is a great knight barring the way across the river on a tree trunk. He basically challenges anyone who approaches to a duel, and they must defeat him or evade him to get through. The section on diplomacy at court doesn't necessarily feature a particular event, however it is important since it can be used in conjunction with the other events and the determination of the outcome of the tournament. This one includes things such as other circles to develop rivalries or alliances with, and details a procedure for gaining or losing disposition with the other rival circles. The section on personal glory is a very brief one and details one-on-one duels that may be issued and accepted throughout the tournament on a side. There are limits on equipment allowed, as well as guidelines on staking glare for the winner. The adversaries are detailed in greater detail than the rest. Under the next section, the Circle Champions, they detail each of the High Circle's major champions with paragraphs detailing their background, as well as combat stats and equipment. The final section of the book is the closing, which gives a description of the final days of the tournament, what can be expected, as well as how to claim the main event prize, which is a vial of threads. The winner of the tournament becomes the bearer of the vial. They receive various glare and virtue points, as well as the vial itself, which functions as a rechargeable essence crystal. There are guidelines on who gets the prize, as well as how to return to reality. The book closes out, of course, with the credits. So what do I think of these two offerings? In terms of writing, they're very similar. I've found that the presentation of Elfking, the writing has become more readable and more streamlined as the releases continue. I appreciate that. There is a high level of quality in terms of the mechanical presentation. The writing has reached a point where I have absolutely no problem with any of the previous criticisms that I had of it, from either a technical or readability standpoint. The illustrations are well designed, and even if you don't like the way they were produced, they do present a relatively cohesive set of imagery that ties not only the individual books together within themselves, but ties them to the prior books. I will note that A Day of a Thousand Nights has a little bit of a more comics book illustration style than the prior offerings, although retaining the same general feel that the images are presented. I find that this is actually a thing going forward with other sagas, which I'll address next time. As far as the actual content, I am a great fan of lower-end introductory and intermediary style adventures. Therefore, The Sleeping Tower really pushed all the right buttons for me. It's not a grand sort of event, such as I've discussed with the Elfking's prior offerings, but it gets the job done and does it in a way that's relatively easy to run. Can't really ask for more than that in a beginner adventure. Would I recommend it to a group that has a bunch of other Elfking material? I'm not so sure, because at that point you can probably just pick any one of a zillion different introductory style adventures that, or make your own because you're used to the game. But if you're still looking to get into the game, it makes for a very decent starting point, and better than the other ones that they were presented. I found The Day of a Thousand Nights to be an interesting sort of gathering of events that I actually have a soft spot for. Tournament style and courtly style offerings for any role-playing game are always a plus with me, and I wish there would be more of them out there for various systems. It seems to be an underserved genre in this day and age. There used to be plenty back in the 90s and in the 80s, but not so much now. None of the quests and events within the tournament compilation are particularly difficult, however they are well on theme and well suited to provide a challenge for a wide variety of skills and builds among different characters. Although I would prefer a slightly more structured scoring system than is provided within here, the one that's included gets the job done and allows for a little bit of GM discretion here and there, as well as interaction with NPCs to modify it. This one I find I can very much recommend for pretty much any group that's into Elfking, although not really as a main event unless you've got some time to kill between major sagas. This is one that you're going to want to have on hand to run between major saga arcs for your group, just to have it available if that's what you're doing. All in all, my own personal preferences on what I like to see in a fantasy adventure game may have colored my look on these two a little bit. They both fit into a kind of favored niche for me in terms of what I look for, so take that as you will. If you're looking for something more epic, I have covered some of the longer or more involved Elfking adventures in a prior review. I invite you to take a look at them. All in all, I have enjoyed these last two offerings a little bit more than I care to admit, largely due to their subject matter. I will put a link to where you can pick them up below if you're into that. With that, I'm going to wrap it up here. This has been the RPG Crawler with my look at the Sleeping Tower and the Day of 1,000 Nights. If you like what you've seen, remember to leave a like, comment any feedback, and subscribe for more RPG content. Until next time, take care and goodbye. And if you are still watching, I would like to take the opportunity to thank my supporters, the top tiers of which are listed on the screen, without whose support I would not have been able to offer the variety of content that I have on this channel throughout the years. If you're feeling particularly generous and would like to join them, you can support the channel. There are a variety of options to do so. I have a Patreon, a Subscribestar, as well as channel memberships enabled. If you are not in a position to contribute, simply leaving a like, a comment, or sharing my videos are all wonderful ways to help the channel grow without spending a dime, and are all greatly appreciated.